sort of take the baton and run with it. So I guess I'll start by saying that when I first heard the term, I was maybe a little bit suspicious of the term cosmopolitan, because I think we all have an idea about what that means, and it actually means something that presumably Michael doesn't actually believe in the politics of, which is a sort of like a multicultural liberal capitalism. Like when we hear the word cosmopolitan, I think a lot of times we think about the biggest and most important cities in the world, and the kinds of like people who work in politics and finance, who work in the center of those cities and sit around boardroom tables and represent a sort of rainbow of nationalities and the extreme heights of power, right? That's what cosmopolitan denotes to me. I think that Michael actually helped denaturalize that word, or the usage of that term, a little bit for me. When you really get to the root of it, cosmopolitan means, it's just been bastardized. It means a citizen of the cosmos, a sort of citizen of the universe, a universal citizen, right? And that is why he chose the term cosmopolitan socialism. Because it's not just international socialism in the sense that you have groups of people living in each country who need to sort of organize with people who live in other countries, though that is obviously a constituent part of cosmopolitan socialism. I think that actually it's different. It's bigger than that. Cosmopolitan socialism is an orientation toward the rest of the world, toward all people in the world, that sort of sees people on equal footing. He writes in Against the Web, he has this important quote, an ancient quote, nothing in the world is alien to me. I can't remember who precisely to attribute that to, but I think that captures the spirit of it. Sort of any human in the world is not sort of ultimately a complete foreigner whose experience I can't understand. I'm sorry if you guys are hearing sounds. There's some yard work going on, and that's just happening. So that's the first thing that comes to mind about cosmopolitan socialism, is sort of like understanding what he meant by the term cosmopolitan, a sort of universal citizen. Let's carry the conversation forward. I'm going to mute this, and hopefully that yard work will stop. Go ahead, Jeremy.
It's all good. Yeah, one of our participants, Thomas, says, "Spring is sprung, no worries." Yeah, as somebody who's also a suburban denizen, I'm just like so used to it now. In any kind of podcast, there's always somebody doing lawn work. But yeah, no, I think it took a while for me to kind of warm up to that reclaiming of the term as well. And I think citizen of the cosmos is very poetic. But it's also like, for those of us who are reading Against the Web right now, Michael is very good at expressing and articulating it in a very beautiful spirit towards the end of the book, like when he's talking about building, and I quoted this on Twitter today, building a truly global intellectual and political culture with roots in a diversity of societies. And I think he was really kind of reaching for this sort of post-identity oriented political culture, which could be globally rooted again. And there was a kind of feeling that had been withdrawing for a while, or that had been captured by the sort of capitalist neoliberal corporate world, where like, a Pepsi commercial could be multicultural but not necessarily a post-capitalist future. So it was really that sense of reclaiming that, I think, which is really stuck with me rereading the book this time. But
yeah, I'll add to that I think one of the concepts that I think is adjacent to cosmopolitan socialism that was very important to Michael, and I think is really important to me and to many of us, is the idea that it may not be fully possible to understand another person's experience of the world wholly, because we are so fractured, and our experiences on this earth as humans are actually so diverse. But it is possible to get closer, and it is actually desirable. And this is something that I think identitarian liberalism has begun to move away from. You do sense that identitarian liberalism, essentialist liberalism, tends to suggest that not only is it impossible for us to understand each other across lines of difference, but it is actually undesirable to try, that you'll do more harm in the attempt than if you simply left it alone. And in that sense, I think a lot of us have noticed that the intellectual scaffolding of that kind of essentialist liberalism ends up at the end of the day looking somewhat similar to a lot of conservative or reactionary thought. I mean, I think usually we tend to like shrug and joke about sort of like neo-segregationism, but there's actually something real and not particularly funny about that. The idea that we should stay separate from one another because our attempts to bridge our divides are actually going to be harmful to one another. It really kind of casts aside the very basis of the idea of solidarity, which is that whatever our differences are, there are commonalities that we can attempt to find, and then we can also try to understand what is different about each other. We can actually attempt to understand that, even if we'll never be able to fully relate, right? So that to me is the kind of, and I think that this is an idea that has actually been maligned in part for good reason, because you do see prior to this contemporary identitarian essentialist liberalism, there was a kind of, and there still is a strain of chauvinism that actually uses the language of universalism to flatten over distinctions and differences and sort of subsume global culture into, you know, Western values and identities. And obviously we want to push back against that, right? It's just that obviously the culture has gone too far and actually insisted that there are things that we can never know about each other, and that we shouldn't even attempt to try to learn about each other and try to come together. I think that Michael was very interested in pushing back on that with the idea of cosmopolitan socialism. And I think partly because the idea needs a defense right now. I think that there are too few people actually rallying to this cause. And I see at least one of Jacobin's sort of political purposes right now is to champion the cause of universalism in a political discourse that's actually pretty hostile to the concept, even if it might claim otherwise.